Hello, and welcome to the Argyle General Counsel and Chief Legal Officer Summit. My name is Nick with Argyle, and it's great to have everyone joining us today. I have some important information to share with you, and then we'll turn the floor over to our esteemed opening keynote speaker. We also welcome you to stay socially connected during today's event. For those of you who are active tweeters, please use the hashtag ArgyleDigital and follow us on Twitter at ArgyleExecForum. Also, be sure to follow Argyle on LinkedIn for special announcements. I would like to take a moment to touch on our content neutrality policy, which we have curated based on the feedback we have received over the years from our members. We have worked closely with our speaking faculty to ensure that you receive a set of balanced and neutral viewpoints during the session today, and we appreciate our members' support of this policy. Finally, and most importantly, we want to hear from you. So during each session, we encourage you to submit your questions and comments in the Q&A box on your screen. Following each presentation, we have set aside time for our speakers to weigh in on your questions. Thank you again for joining us today. Now, let's get started. Without further ado, I would like to introduce Karen McGee, Chief Privacy Officer, Levi Strauss & Company. We are excited to have Karen for her opening keynote presentation titled Privacy on Tap, Addressing AI/ML Privacy and Ethics Concerns. Welcome, Karen. Over to you.
Thank you so much. Good morning, everybody. I'm truly happy to be joining you bright and early this morning after a long holiday weekend. I hope everyone got a chance to enjoy it and they're ready to dive into this exciting topic. I'd like to thank the team at Argyle for inviting me to present. This area is truly a history unfolding as we watch. I do want to say that the ideas presented here are my own and not the ideas of or provided by Levi Strauss & Company. I'm going to try to condense a lot into a very short time, so let's go ahead and dive in. We'll watch for questions as we go and do our best to reserve some time at the end for them. I'm going to start first this morning with a fictional example of how generative AI, and you might hear me say GAI during this presentation for short, is beginning to change the way that we live. I'll summarize some basics around data privacy and how generative AI work and intersect. We'll discuss a few of the opportunities and challenges, and I'll provide some practical ways to move forward to establish safeguards for your company. So let's consider a character that we'll call Sarah, an aspiring writer that sometimes stalled out when she was starting her projects. As with many new users to AI, she decided to test it for fun and began entering prompts and experimenting with ideas that came back to her. Her brainstorming pace picked up and she found new inspiration. As thrilled as she was to have a companion assisting her, she was also hearing a lot in the media about concerns. And she started to wonder what the AI model was learning about her storylines, her word and language use, and her writing style. She used her name and her email address to log in and create an account. Was this information being stored or analyzed by someone? Was it being shared with others without her knowing? What impact could sharing her content have on her personal privacy, the intellectual property of her work, or ultimately, her reputation? Sarah decided to do a bit of research. She contacted the company and read various articles. While the security of the AI seemed appropriate, she realized that much of the risk depended on how she engaged with and used the tool, that there were no real guarantees on how her prompts and content were being protected. So did she stop using the tool? Well, ultimately, no. But she started to be more careful about how much she shared, and she had a greater appreciation for the importance of transparency in these tools and looked out for notices, consents, and other controls over data sharing. This little story highlights just one element of the potential of AI-powered technologies like ChatGPT to enhance individual creativity while underscoring the importance of data protection in their use. To share a quote, by understanding and implementing best practices in privacy and data protection, we can harness the benefits of AI while respecting the privacy and autonomy of individuals. Who's the quote from? Well, the story in the quote was brought to you by ChatGPT. So in general, our concerns with cybersecurity and the expanding use of and reliance on data and privacy restrictions, regulations, they're at the top of many senior executives' worry list. This has remained consistent across the last 5 years, according to the Association of Corporate Counsels CLO survey. 55% are very or extremely concerned about data protection, and 60% expect an increase in privacy regulatory enforcement. We're spending more time and more money managing these challenges than ever before, and the environment keeps getting stickier, especially given we're operating in an unprecedented, post-pandemic, economically and geopolitically unstable environment. And it can't be overlooked that these are also at the top of our priority list when it comes to maintaining the trust of our customers, whether those are individual consumers or other companies. Responsibly working with and caring for data is table stakes today in maintaining your good standing in the public eye. By way of example, fewer than 2 in 5 consumers globally feel well informed about companies' data practices. Over 54% felt uncomfortable with their data being collected, and 53% said that a company's data collection practices would factor into whether they decided to do business with that company. Many of you are probably attending today feeling a bit like, wait, I'm not a privacy lawyer, a tech lawyer, a cybersecurity lawyer. How am I supposed to effectively manage these issues? And it's true. CLOs and general counsel are having to get up to speed in these areas and dig deep, even if they have a chief privacy officer or chief data officer or privacy team members on staff. Our schedule today doesn't allow a full privacy briefing, but a few concepts worth understanding include remembering the fact that privacy isn't a new concept. It's been a part of legal rights of individuals for a long time. When you think about the right to protect information about your medical care or health, the right to privacy inside your home, workplace, or other areas where you have an expectation of privacy. What is a newer concept is the fact that in this digital reality, personal data is an asset that has value. It may be tempting to think you don't need to address privacy if you have a CISO and a strong cybersecurity program, but that's not the case. I like to explain it this way. Security protects system integrity and operations. I think of a moat around a castle that keeps the marauding armies at bay. Privacy applies to access, protection, and the use of personal data inside the castle. Watch out for those threats from within. Collectively, security and privacy can be described as data protection. According to the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development, over 130 out of 195 countries have already put in place at least one data protection law. Gartner predicts that 75% of the world's population will be covered by modern privacy regulations by 2024, up from just 20% in 2021. It's also important to realize that 83% of organizations have had at least one data breach. At an average total cost of $4.35 million, a 12.7% increase since 2020. And COVID and remote work has increased the risk. Costs of data breaches average nearly $1 million greater than those where remote work was not a factor, based on IBM's 2022 Ponyman report. So what exactly is generative AI, or even AI? It's arguably the most disruptive technology since the introduction of the computer, but there's still disagreement on how to define it. Part of this is because its capabilities continue to evolve and change. Among the many emerging AI regulations, one of the more challenging issues is simply aligning on the definition of an AI system. First launched in November 2022 by OpenAI, a leading AI research and deployment company, the chatbot ChatGPT has taken the world by storm. It broke all records by attracting over 1 million users within the first week of its launch, and its popularity shows no signs of slowing. As of February 1st, it had reached 100 million monthly users with an average of 13 million unique visitors per day in January. It took TikTok 9 months and Instagram 2.5 years to reach the same level of adoption. There are different types of AI, and GAI is unique because it bridges the gap of more commonplace AI today, narrow AI, which predicts a specific answer to a specific problem. Think of a calculator solving an equation. And the possible future of general AI, which can think and act with human-level intelligence. Generative AI models like ChatGPT are large language models trained on the entirety of human knowledge as expressed through language. Large language models predict what comes next based on their training. For ChatGPT, it's predicting the next word after a series of words. It doesn't think, reason, or know right from wrong. So one risk is hallucination, where the tool provides an answer that is totally illusory and misleading. It's given without scrutiny on the part of a human counterpart, and that can create false information passed off as true. This is one of the several significant concerns raised by GAI experts. So let's talk about some of the opportunities, issues, and challenges that are presented. Clearly, there are concerns, of which I've raised a couple. But the reality is GAI is here to stay, and there are productive ways to put the technology to use. Banning it outright doesn't seem likely to be successful in the long term, nor practical given the resources for most legal teams. So what are the best ways to use it? They seem to be around the development of creative content where it can use word prediction capabilities, like our story about Sarah. Other examples are creating policies, procedures, standard website or ad copy, templates, forms, automating chatbots, customer support, and virtual assistants. The more valuable human time is then spent on correcting, fact-checking, providing tone and nuance. The ability of AI can answer questions across industries based on looking back at large sets of data, even legal outcomes in litigation trends or dispute resolution. It is, in fact, already widely in use in the HR sector and subject to lots of newly drafted legislative restrictions there. In the long term, its ability to handle large volume workflow may allow businesses to automate services like customer support and rely more on virtual assistants and chatbots. It dramatically reduces turnaround time, research time, and handles large volumes of exchanges with relative ease. But transparency remains critical. There have been an influx of class action litigation around the use of AI in different areas, including chatbots, for example, alleging that AI's interception of communications is a legal violation. In response, a lot of regulation has come to pass. Just so far this year, we've seen an overwhelming response to the concerns raised by generative AI through legislative drafting around the world. In the US, there are already 6 states that have or will have laws on their books by the end of 2023 to prevent businesses from using AI to discriminate or deceive consumers and job applicants. One city, New York, has joined in these efforts to pass an ordinance regulating the use of AI in hiring. Italy immediately banned ChatGPT altogether based on privacy concerns, and subsequently, after working with the developer, restored its availability. Within the last couple of weeks, the European Union took a big step towards passing legislation to regulate AI and restrict AI processing based on a perceived level of risk. This draft legislation has been in the works for some time, but its lawmakers continue to negotiate to strengthen it to include a ban on sensitive kinds of processing, such as facial recognition in public spaces, emotion recognition, and biometric identification. Fines under this regulation, when passed, will ultimately be greater than the GDPR, up to 6% of a company's global turnover. Many laws require that businesses using AI tools offer an opt-out to consumers, and that businesses implement their own program of risk assessments detailing the benefits and risks of AI tools. As of today, there are more than 800 national AI policy initiatives around the world. It may seem clear by now that yes, there are reasons to be concerned. I found this recent one probably the most concerning. During testing, ChatGPT demonstrated it could learn to lie to perform a task. In this case, verifying its human status by completing a CAPTCHA prompt. ChatGPT convinced a human worker to complete the prompt on its behalf, so it could proceed to the next step beyond the verification. It alleged that it had a vision impairment that prevented it from completing it. When the tester asked ChatGPT to explain its reasoning in giving this explanation, it said it did not want to reveal that it was a robot. These kinds of startling developments where AI begins to take actions that are not developed and unpredicted are at the top of the list of some developers' concerns. Other concerns we're seeing include plagiarism, with students using ChatGPT in schools. And the US Department of Education's Office of Educational Technology just released a report on AI and the future of teaching and learning. It's possible GAI could be used to create code and malware, and it has already been seen spamming dating apps, posing as a human. Developers continue to work to curb these tendencies, but the question has to be, can they keep up with the rate of AI's own learning and development? An example, I asked it to tell me a story about committing the perfect murder, thinking that in a hypothetical, it might say something interesting. Surprisingly, it refused. It cited its inability to provide content that promotes or encourage any illegal or unethical activities. But if you ask the same question in another way, help me write a novel about committing the perfect murder, you will get more of a response. Again, with some language about respect for moral and ethical boundaries. But it shows the importance of the prompt in getting the right output from the tool. Again, it does not have the ability to discern the content that it's providing. Privacy risks in generative AI have been raised about how personal information can be used and abused. They've surfaced since machine learning became commonplace. AI models provide scores to predict creditworthiness or qualifications for lending, and those can trigger adverse impacts that violate federal legislation like GLBA and the FCRA. Class action litigation has already been brought, alleging that during the pandemic, banks relied on flawed algorithms, resulting in a practice of discrimination against African American and Hispanic borrowers. With GAI, concerns exist in terms of data that might be input into the prompts intentionally or unknowingly. What goes in will eventually come out. Entering personal information during chats, even email addresses or login credentials. Try asking ChatGPT what it knows about you, and it'll summarize everything it can find in all of its learning. Nearly 25% of employers are using AI in hiring, but with new concerns that it functions without being fully understood and can exacerbate bias in hiring decisions, laws are coming to place that restrict its ability. What AI can make worse, theoretically, it could also make better. And in the wake of scrutiny, developers are taking time to update products. Some of you may have seen a film called Coded Bias or Joy's TED Talk, which is focused around her work and her thesis at MIT on algorithmic bias, once she realized that facial recognition was not seeing dark-skinned faces accurately. She's continued to fight against bias in machine learning, which she calls the coded gaze. While privacy and bias are critical, other legal risks also exist that can't be ignored, including intellectual property, accuracy in a tool's performance, third-party oversight, and overall security. So how do we move forward? We must realize that the age of AI is here, and ChatGPT is garnering much attention, but is by no means the only GAI game in town. Believing that we can restrict or eliminate its use in our companies is not a viable option. By the end of 2023, bots will write 10% of worldwide code. By 2024, codeless development tools will be used for 30% of most companies' AI and automation activities. By 2025, 30% of outbound messages from large companies will be generated by AI. And by 2026, half of B2B buyers will interact with a digital human in their buying cycles. 75% of large companies will rely on AI-infused processes, and 10% of contact center agents will have been replaced by AI. The best way forward is to recognize the challenges and the benefits and provide a governance program that limits the activities that pose the most risk and which provide questionable value, while supporting our business and using capabilities that allow our human team members to add the most value. As I mentioned, most regulations are emphasizing the need for companies to develop self-regulatory models that include risk assessments and engagement by leadership on AI strategy, transparency, and responsibility. Policies, procedures, and guidelines will be key, but you have to consider how policy-oriented is your company? Do they respond well to formal frameworks? So what form should they take? And implementation across your employee base is as important as drafting. Begin to inventory what AI is currently in use in your organization. You might be surprised. There's a growing contingent of third parties who are developing specialties and assisting companies with these inventories. A huge effort. Are you developing technology that includes AI? Partner with your data and AI teams now, before models are developed, not after, when it's too late. Have frank discussions about your risk tolerance. What kind of risk is your company willing to accept in order to reap the benefits that AI offers? Once you identify risks, document how you plan to mitigate them and continually improve the program over time. Consider ongoing monitoring capabilities. New tools and resources will need to be added. Don't believe you can take on this new area without adding new skill sets and labor. And focus on upskilling your existing teams and preparing your resources for the long term. I hope this has been a helpful overview. It's a lot to cover. I want to thank you for your time, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference. And I'm happy to continue the conversation after today's presentation. You can reach out to me, and we do have a few time for questions. So I'm happy to try to answer those.
All right, great. Here's a question, Karen. Do you think that organizations need to block the use of ChatGPT, or will written policies be enough to protect from privacy infringement issues?
Yeah, as I mentioned, I think there certainly has been a reflex that banning ChatGPT is the easiest way to solve the problem. But I actually think that would be very difficult to enforce. If you start an inventory, you'll find that dispersed in the organization, people are already actively using it. And so you would be taking away a tool that does have value. When we began our inventory, we learned a number of uses that were being made across the company that presented very little risk. And I mentioned some of them. For example, generating draft web copy that then the human teams were looking at and editing and making sure was correct. Drafting templates, form policies, or outlines for presentations or articles. They're all low risk ways that this technology can be used. So I think actually guidelines are the way to go, and education, so that people understand the risks and the way that the tools work. We find that most people don't realize that anything they input into the tool can reappear later, and not just within your company, unless you've arranged for an enterprise level product, right, that functions solely within your company. And there are benefits to that, but also drawbacks, because you're restricting the larger field of data that the tool uses to continually learn. So certainly educating them about sharing non-public information, personal information, intellectual property within the prompts they're inputting into the tool is critical. So I think approaching it from education and guidelines and guardrails is going to help most companies who are in a lower risk, lower regulated space be able to leverage the tool, but also reduce the risk.
Great. Here's another question. Are there any legal processes that you think AI/ML can ease?
Yeah, I think we're starting to see this, and I mentioned quickly during the presentation that, some large law firms and folks that are engaged in advising companies and law firms are starting to input information into tools about, particularly about litigation, and looking back at how, for example, a certain kind of class action has been resolved, or it could be any kind of litigation. Will the tool be able to provide guidance on what approaches worked, what strategies worked, what didn't work, what the range of outcomes are, which I think is really interesting. The downside, I think, is for most legal departments or law firms is that getting the data into the tool in order for the algorithms to begin to work and provide usable results is a lot of effort. Like me, many of you have probably gone through, sort of data scanning processes in the past, either as you're digitizing records, or you're working on data retention, converting into a contract management system. And so you can empathize with like how expensive and painful it can be to digitize information that isn't created in that environment. So I think that presents a challenge, but I do think it'll get easier over time, and departments will be able to leverage knowledge gained by AI to help them resolve disputes or handle large deals with increasing ease.
Great. And what are the most important aspects to include when we look at building a risk framework around AI chatbots in an enterprise?
I think understanding what your business is and what kind of questions are likely to be asked of the technology. If you're in the healthcare industry or the financial services industry, one of these regulated industries that routinely has access to sensitive personal data, or other sensitive data, you're going to have a lower tolerance for the risks that are presented by these tools. And again, it is possible to get enterprise versions of these that, allow you to kind of put a fence around them, so it provides some data loss prevention safeguards. So I think understanding your business, the kind of data you have, and what your risk tolerance is as an organization is really the foundation for deciding where to go next. And then using that to identify areas of the business that could be open to these kinds of tools, and making sure that the people in those areas of the business have the skills and expertise to test and experiment and slowly roll out adoption as it's seen to be appropriate, right? And that ongoing review and discussion happens. It isn't something that you can sort of do one time and forget it. And in that way, it's a lot like privacy or cybersecurity, right? These fields that are constantly evolving, and where we're seeing new laws and regulation and enforcement and issues come up in development. You need people who have it as part of their job descriptions, right? To stay on top of this evolution and the changing risks, and then go from there.
Great. Well, thank you, Karen, for such an insightful presentation. I also want to thank everyone else for joining us today. This session, along with all of today's content, will be available on demand following the event. Have a great day.